Hello and welcome to a special comics burst from the Full Force podcast, sponsored by Distant Planet Comics and Collectibles, where we take an in-depth look at the newest G.I. Joe comics and related titles of the week, with me as your host, Chris Loser1 McLeod, aka Diagnostic 80. Joining me on this special episode is a Full Force virgin, but long-time friend of the show and general expert know-it-all regarding all things 80s properties, Dave New Kid Newman. On this instalment of your absolutely favourite kind of burst, we have the first part of our Gobots Comics Burst special, where we delve into the first 3 issues of this interesting series by Tom Scioli. So without further ado, let's get stuck into this Comics Burst. Gobots Issue 1. Gobots have changed our way of life. Leader 1 is a self-aware fighter jet on a hostage rescue mission with his partner, Commander Nick Burns. Scooter is the personal transport and best friend to undergrad AJ Foster. Turbo is Matt Hunter's transforming race car in the hottest sport in America, Gobot racing. Cycle is the champion of the illegal underground Gobot fighting league. Standard. They say they're here to help us, but are they here to replace us? So Dave, thanks for joining me on the show for your first time on the Full Force podcast, long-time friend and fan of the show. Take us through that first issue, or thoughts on that first issue for you.
Well, thank you first of all for having me on.
Not at all.
I took on the job because Paddy was too scared to.
He'll like that.
Before we get to talking about the comics, let's talk about our prior opinions on 1, Gobots, and 2, Tom Scioli, who's the writer and artist. So What did you think of Gobots before you read this and read these comics? And what did you think of Tom Scioli and his work prior?
Well, I must admit that with the Gobots franchise, as it were, in my head it was the original cartoon and the toy line were the kind of main things that stood out to me prior to really any... without doing any research, without looking into any depth. From as a kid, I remember having loads of Gobot figures or Robo machines or whatever you could get your hands on. There were so many different iterations of this friggin' brand. It was weird, especially in the UK and Europe. And I just remember the cartoon being a little bit kitschier, a little bit softer, a little bit kind of more tongue-in-cheek than the Transformers cartoon, which was the more gritty version of that style of kind of all that format, I would say. But I did like it. I did enjoy it. I had fond memories of it. It's one of the ones I haven't actually gone back to watch again. It's always been locked up in my nostalgia part of my brain. So prior to this, Gobots has always I've had an affection for it, really. And the toys being so wildly different to the Transformers toys as well. There's real stylistic differences between the two brands, which is kind of weird when you think you wouldn't expect that from a design perspective. You could really, how many different ways are there to go from robot to vehicle? Do you know what I mean? I feel that's always been quite interesting in the toy element. But adding as well to the Tom Scioli question, I was kind of up and down with his previous Transformers work and the kind of Transformers G.I. Joe crossover that he did. I've always been very there were some issues that I actually really enjoyed, and there were some issues I was just like, this is so far out there that I don't really know what's going on. So coming into this Gobots issue 1, I wasn't really sure what to expect, and I've been pleasantly surprised overall. What about yourself?
Pretty much the same on both aspects. I'll know Gobots from the cartoon, from the toys, not really from those Robo Machine comics. I think I can't tell you which, was it maybe Eagle Comics that they were kind of in as well?
Possibly, yeah.
And I think that Gobots for us in the UK probably would have been a TVAM thing.
Yeah.
I want to say that Timmy Mallet was the Goboty guy.
Brilliant.
I might be wrong, but that's the memory I've got. The toys, a lot smaller than Transformers, look more like real vehicles than Transformers kind of ended up moving to. I like Gobots. I've never got into the thing of the poor man's Transformers.
Yeah.
There's some episodes that are passable. There's some that are pretty good. I like the 2 5-parters. I like the Battle of the Rock Lords movie. So you've got somebody here who wasn't coming into it thinking, oh, Gobots. I was pretty optimistic. The only kind of bone of contention I might have had was Tom Scioli's work, because I read the Transformers G.I. Joe crossover as well, and I found it hard to follow as far as how he sort of laid things out on the page. Too much going on in the same issues as well. You pretty much have got a story per page, but when that's about 22 pages, it's hard to follow. So a little bit of sort of caution coming into it, but luckily it hasn't disappointed. So I guess at that point we'll talk about the first issue, and you gave the solicitation for it, which is pretty much where it is. You've got Leader One and Nick first off, then you've got AJ and Scooter, and then you've got Nick and Turbo, and of course Cycle as well. What did you think about how they sort of rolled out all the characters?
I thought it was very chronological, so everything's very kind of like in a nice order. I found it quite interesting of like the kind of way that Tom has, because we're on first name terms now, mainly because his surname is so difficult to pronounce. I'm not sure if I'm even saying it correctly, but his style, as you mentioned, is cramming so much into such a short space. So you have like that first page, for example, that you literally open to, and it is Leader One. It's all like the jets in the sky, and you're still talking like 7 panels, and one of them takes up the entire page. So it's like, that's impressive straight away. I do love the idea of that kind of harking back to the original kind of comic strip format, where it was a little bit like you had to get a story in a very short space of time because you only had that one little strip to do it in. And I feel like that's what this is like. It's like reading a Calvin and Hobbes kind of book. It's like, and if our well, in its format, I mean, like if you get one of those big books of the compendium of like Calvin and Hobbes strips, it's like you go through, you know, like you could have read like 15 different storylines in a short space of time, and that's exactly what's going on here. You could easily spread it out and have way more going on here, but I really enjoyed the pace of the first issue. There's a lot of stuff as well, like even though there's a lot going on, there's one page where there's hardly any text and it's just all action, and you can get through that really quick because of the way that you move through the page. And I do like that balance of having some exposition, but then a little bit of like, you know, the Larry Hammer silent issue aspect of it, just to kind of get you moving, get you kind of, you know, in a nice kind of pace with it, and I thought the first issue had a really good balance of that.
Certainly, it's definitely got a fast pace to it. You're not going to get bored reading it. It's certainly not ponderous at all. It's about 3 pages to start off with, or maybe more for the little Leader One story to establish him as the main character. Leader One's one of 3 jets that are pretty much the same, but he's the one that we're going to follow through, and then we'll switch to Scooter and AJ, to Nick and Matt, and we're seeing a mix of influences. There's a lot of the cartoon in there, but there's also a lot of the toys in there as well. Say, for instance, when we're getting the origin of the Gobots via Dr. Braxis, who, of course, was the human villain in the cartoon. If you have a look at a character like Zemon, for instance, in the cartoon, they simplified his design by just having him have a plain white chest, but here you've got the bird design on his chest as well. So they're kind of mixing up the level of influence. Some look like the toys, some look like the cartoon. You got that even on the front cover, and all of these comics have got good front covers as well.
Oh, yeah.
First one looks like the cartoon, but then when we switch to the story, he's got that mouth guard on that the toy had as well, but it's not going to stick with that either.
Absolutely. I love that. I love the fact that there's a kind of influence from all the different areas of the Gobots franchise, and that for the front cover I have, or the local comic shop day one, which is the one I'm going to be flashing up on screen, it's so beautiful. It's the 3 characters you mentioned, you know, Scooter, Turbo, and Leader One. And in the background, what's the big fortress called again? The
command center.
Yeah, the command center in the background. And it's just really, it's the cartoon definitely like influenced massively. And then, even down to the fact that all of the curves on the arms, which I always found really funny as a kid. Like, you've got these like really blocky toys, and then in the cartoon there's loads of curvature and stuff to make them more and almost like more human. It's quite it was an interesting technique, but one that definitely took it out of the realism kind of area for me. Whereas like you could kind of, there's a suspension of disbelief in G.I. Joe and Transformers and all those cartoons, but there's always an element of realism to, the way that they're animated to a degree. And I think that GoBots took it a completely different direction. And coming back to the comic, I love the way that we're kind of given the introductions to these characters. And once again, I have to kind of bring it up because something we haven't spoken about yet is the actual art in this particular issue. Like, for me personally, like the art I found, because with Tom, and again, it's first name terms, with Tom and the Transformers Joe crossover, some of the art was, really kind of, I don't know, there's kind of quirky, and then there's like just bad, and I don't know where the line is sometimes, and it's very much a thing for, I think, an individual to make that decision for themselves, is if you're into it or you're not into it. Sometimes I wasn't into it with Tom's crossover stuff, but in this one I think it works nicely, and he kind of doesn't go too far into the quirkiness, especially in the first issue. It does change a little bit as we go on, but in that first issue we tend to stay with a theme, and it kind of works. And I do like the rich colours, and I like the way that the kind of like the way he's got the moving in panel to panel, because there are a lot of panels where everything's very square, everything's very like in a box, but then there are other things where he breaks out of that mold, and I think when he breaks out of that mold, I'm more interested in what I'm reading.
Yeah, he does some interesting things. I mean, he's obviously got a very sort of patented visual style where it looks like a comic that's been in the back of a drawer since 1987, and the pages have yellowed, and the style of sort of the art style that he's used is as if it's been sort of penciled and inked by himself, which it has, but it's been done with the more modern techniques to look like the older techniques. I mean, it really does look on some pages like he's just been there with his pencil, sort of scratching away at some of the details for it. I mean, I'm looking, for instance, at one of the new characters that he introduces, which is T. Coriander Banks. And that was kind of a strange one because he's introducing a new character, which is fine. Although he's got him alongside Stretch, the limousine Gobot, and I felt like when I was reading it that I should know who this is, or it's a reference, but I don't think it is, which is a bit strange. But we'll get past it. He's a bald guy in a suit and with his glasses, and this was kind of the first sign of where he's kind of playing around a little bit with some of the design and how he sort of gives us the characters. For instance, Stretch or Tux normally would be a off-white cream limousine, but he's got him in black, which makes sense because more often the car's going to be black than white. But as you were talking about how he takes things out of the panels, you've got a good shot there with Turbo next to Stretch, who looks like he's been stretched out. He's so much taller than Turbo, so that's where he's using the layout to his advantage.
Yeah, big time. Totally agree with the talk about Stretch as well being the kind of the black in this particular comic, and I think that's definitely a kind of stylistic approach from Tom there, isn't it? To kind of to kind of say, well, to recognise it as someone that isn't a GoBots fan, it would probably make more sense to have them in black. Stretch or Tux as Stretch, he was one I had, and one I picked up a bit later on in life as well after shifting all my GoBots. Which is still quite sad because I did have quite a few as a kid. I'm not that guy that goes, yeah, I had all of them, mate. I had the yellow one, the aeroplane,
I had all of the Transformers, all of the bots.
The red one. I love it when they'll list them and then they'll say something like, that the tape deck. And all right, so great. So you're a big fan if you don't know what the tape deck's called.
I was going to say with GoBots, you could say I had the red one, and it'd be which red one? Because there's probably about 25 different red ones between Turbo, Scooter,
even Cycle. Cycle's
Renegade cars.
Yeah, even Cycle's got some red in him. Okay, in terms of that issue 1,
Cycle's quickly established as the lead villain. He's leading a rebellion of renegade GoBots, including people like Crasher, Copter, Fighter, etc. And that leads them to a big fight in the desert with Leader 1. And And one of the things I was going to say as well that was established early in the comic and carries through to this issue, the next issue, and the third issue, is the level of violence. Is that he doesn't let the characters pull any punches at all. They're knocking the bells out of each other, and that's pretty kind of clashes with the theme of GoBots, which you'd think would be a bit kiddie-ish and a little bit more PG. Whereas now he's having people get ripped in half, legs get pulled off, arms get pulled off, faces getting scarred, and that was quite jarring but welcome at the same time.
Yeah, agreed. In terms of this first issue, we won't do we do a rating, obviously, but overall, would you say was this one that was like a positive experience for you?
Definitely, and I was looking forward to the next one, and that's kind of carried through. Sometimes when you get a first issue, you'll have this excitement about it, and that won't always carry through. Whereas we've actually, in reviewing all three issues, we can sort of see whether the level stays up or goes down, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But yeah, I thought it was a good start. I think he was doing things that were different. He had a level of familiarity that was good, so it kind of hooked you in. Little faults, maybe a little bit too fast-paced at times. Maybe some things in the story, for instance, with Professor Braxis and AJ and their little story, kind of goes somewhere and doesn't sort of lead to anything. But he's not leaving me bored, at least.
I would say that the first issue is probably my favourite out of the three of them so far. Spoiler alert! But has that? I feel like the pacing for me is it's good, and I think what you're saying there about that, sometimes it's too quick, definitely happens in the next two issues. So before we move on to issue 2, let me just quickly get your rating out of 5 for this first issue.
I would give it a generous 4.
And I would probably agree with you. I'd say it's definitely up there, especially if we look overall. Now, it's difficult when you're looking at like the first 3 issues because there's still going to be 2 more coming through, which we'll do a special 2-part or second part episode review of those. So to not look at everything overall can obviously, ratings could change when we get to the 4 and 5 could be brilliant. So because of that, we'll give it 4 now, and let's move on to issue 2. Scioli and his renegades declare war on human civilization, and they're winning. Gobotics freshman AJ Foster and cynical Gobot race car driver Matt Hunter, along with their friendly Gobot Scooter and Turbo, flee for their lives as they desperately search for some way to stop the extinction of mankind and the dawn of the planet of the Gobots. Okay, Dave, take me through issue 2.
Second issue starts quite strangely because we're having a flashback story with Screwhead and an engineer that he works with, and we find out that the engineer died in a cave-in with him. He made it out, but the human engineer didn't. And that's used as a kind of to move us into the present, with Scioli sort of using that to bond with him, and as our lives mean nothing to them, our deaths mean even less. It's time for us to return the favour, brother. So it's how he's kind of bringing Screwhead into the flock, and you would imagine that he's done much the same with the other renegades that are along with him. Leader One's given to 2 of the puzzler robots to dispose of. That won't happen, and then the the renegade Gobot assault on the city and on civilization starts. We kind of pick up from that last issue with a bit of menace of AJ worrying that Scooter is going to turn against her as well. And that's kind of very quickly resolved by saying, I'd never let anything happen to you. You're my best friend. You're my best friend too. You're just saying that because I did. And then they move on. There's no sort of, they're not being menaced by Professor Braxis and Vamp, as was the case in the last issue. And it just kind of moves on. We've seen these little sort of references to other things being made. For instance, Bug Bite, the yellow Volkswagen Beetle renegade, you can see through his windscreen and it looks like a bumblebee head, which is an interesting little reference for you to get. And it's the team up of Scooter and Turbo to find out what's happening, why have these Gobots turned on humanity, and it'll all sort of end up with Leader One escaping the 2 puzzler robots and coming back for a big fight with Scioli. And these 2 issues feel like any other normal series would be stretched over 5 issues, but again, it's that accelerated pace. not letting us get bored at any moment. But maybe is he doing too much in one go?
I have to agree with that. I think that the second issue does ramp up the speed dramatically. And this is where we start seeing all of those different things kind of getting like new things added in, and kind of it creates a little bit of a bottleneck sometimes, especially in my head, where if you're reading something and it's nice and comfortable and you fall into it and you're, drawn in and everything, that's great. That still happened with this issue, which I was surprised at. I was almost expecting it not to be as good as the first issue immediately. I don't know why. I just already had that kind of expectation. And it wasn't that it wasn't as good. It's just that it added so many things that I was going, okay, so what am I... Okay, so I'm basically seeing a recruitment drive from Scioli, effectively. That's, we're seeing the kind of subtle recruitment drive to get more...
Yeah.
allies for him, and everything else is a bit splintered and a little bit kind of erratic. It's not really... I felt like it wasn't drawing together, in a way, even though that was what the idea was. It was to kind of like the story is trying to kind of develop all of these things to bring them into one place. And obviously we do get the leader one cycle standoff, which was quite nice early on. It's like, okay, well, they're getting into this pretty fast, issue 2. And I, again, like the I suppose the theme of violence comes up pretty strong in that particular fight. And you have like leader 1 with like half his face missing, and it's just like, wow, like they went, this is in no way the cartoon. If anything, it's more, when you look at the toys, it's more what you kind of expect the toys to be like.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's almost, you look at the toys and you definitely see a more kind of evil or darker side.
Some of them don't have details.
Yes.
Some of them will just have these featureless faces.
Yes.
And that makes them less human, which when you're doing a cartoon, you want to be able to show somebody's lips moving as they talk. So you put a mouth on, or you put eyes on, or a nose on to make them appear more human.
Yes. And that was another, a kind of masterstroke for kids, to get kids on board for like the cartoons and things like that. Another element of violence is something I found really, really harsh, is when Scioli is riding Scooter over the reverse spikes on the ground where you get car parks. So
yeah, and especially as what we'll see has happened to Scooter in the next issue makes it even more kind of warped. And there is this kind of warped sensibility to it as well. I mean, just as one of the pit fights with Scioli in the first issue, there's some guy in like a gimp mask.
Yeah. And
then you've got Crasher making Scooter lick her tyres in this issue as well, like some sort of dominatrix. So
yeah, there's and this is adult.
I hope Tom doesn't ever listen to this, but we kind of know what you're into, Tom. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm waiting for his the kind of real adult issue, which is 4, which is just going to be them in a sex dungeon the entire time.
Yeah, Handscuff, he'll be the policeman. Cycle will be the guy that owns the pawn shop.
Butt Plug will be one of the...
That's it. Yeah. Dild.
Dild, his name will be. Okay, so issue 2, I feel like they started to ramp up the kind of square paneling in this one as well. Like there's I feel like there was way more of that. There's a few kind of deviations, but not as many as I would have liked, especially in the first issue. I was, you're treated to like a lot of different kind of panel layouts, and then it got very... I don't know, it got very original Watchmen in this issue.
What about that page where it's the stand when Leader 1 emerges with his guardians, as they'll be, against the renegades, and that standoff in the street? That's quite cinematic because you've got the close-ups on the different faces, and then you've got the wide shot of Scioli and all the renegades, and then Leader 1 and all the Gobots, and you get the feeling that there's going to be this big fight happening now.
Yeah. It's like Warriors, isn't it, almost? Especially that top left panel where they kind of like, they're blurred kind of coming in, and then all of a sudden you see them. Yeah, it's a really effective layout, really effective panel. There's something else I always kind of laugh when I see this, but it's used so much when the military are fighting like giants or like big monsters, and it's this very small panel underneath that giant one-on-one Scioli versus Leader 1 on the next page, and it's just the kind of like it's like they've got the tanks and all the vehicles and the guy with the binoculars giving the orders and everything just firing up into the sky. And it's like they used it in Cloverfield, funnily enough, as well. It's almost like there's one bit where they're trying to run across the street and all of the military with the tanks and everything are doing that classic comic panel pose of them all just like firing up at that angle. And I've always liked that because it's almost like a comic trope, with those kind of things.
Yeah, another thing as well to talk about it is a friend of mine has just been recently getting into the original Batman the animated series, and one of his comments on it is it looks kind of old timey, but then at the same time you've got modern technology.
Yeah.
And I'd say the same with this as well, is that it wouldn't look out of place I don't mean with the sort of the artistic style, but the things that he's representing in the comics look like they could have come out of the 80s, like the tanks and like the guy with the pit helmet and the binoculars. But at the same time, there's enough modern stuff in it as well to make it think, well, where does this fit in?
It's almost like retro future in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
But like
Absolutely.
like the Batman animated series was almost like 40s, 50s, maybe even 20s styling. Like you say, you're totally right. This is more 80s styling in a modern setting, and I think it works really well. And I think it's a perfect time to bring a franchise like this back, I think, because the nostalgia's huge for 80s stuff. I mean, I feel like it always has been since we hit I don't know, the late 90s going into the early 2000s. I feel like the 80s has always been it's almost been an era defined before it finished. It was almost like the 80s was the 80s. Even like in the mid 80s, like people were referring to the era and almost like looking to the future and saying we'll be looking back at this and this will be a like an era defining place in history.
And I'm glad as well that he didn't go to any sort of efforts to modernise the designs, because this is the first time that we've seen them since the 80s.
Agreed.
Other than little cameos in Transformers comics and things like that, but we haven't seen this cycle, this Leader One, in many things since then. So let's keep them as they looked.
I think that's great, and I think that's one of that's actually a thing of Tom Scioli's, isn't it? Like he when he did the Transformers G.I. Joe crossover, the whole premise was that it's like a child playing with the toys, and this is the kind of ridiculous story that comes out of it. And I feel like the same has been transplanted to Gobots.
Absolutely.
In that he's playing with the toys, and this is the story that's coming out of it. But maybe he's a little bit older, and he's starting to formulate more coherent stories. The world isn't as loose, like the things aren't. You're not kind of veering into kind of absolute insanity yet.
A lot of my friends, when they got to their teenage years and they hadn't chucked away their Transformers, but they were still into it, were going and welding bits of wire and missiles and guns on them to look in like that edgy G style. And that's what you're getting with the violence here, is that you'd never get Psykill ripping Leader One's jaw off and Leader One reattaching it himself and having big cuts across their face as we get in the big battle at the end. And Leader One even getting half his face ripped off by that edged tire as well.
You get the feeling this is like the teenager playing with their toys, don't you? Yeah, totally. Yeah. I would almost guarantee that's what he's going for. I haven't read anything about that yet, but I'm sure that's what he's going for. And actually I might do some research on that after the fact for this part 2, because I'd love to know if that is his idea as a writer. But anyway, the issue as a whole, Dave, again, is it continuing the positivity for you, and then also if you could throw in a rating at the end, please.
I think so. As I said, it feels like the issue 1 felt like an issue 1, and issue 2 feels like issue 5 of a 5-part series. So it's a great start and a great ending as well. So it does feel like it's being over generous, but I'd probably say it's in that 3.5 to 4. I couldn't say to you which issue was better, issue 1 or issue 2. So I've got to be kind of consistent and say let's go with a 4 again. Might be partly because there's fondness in there, but hey, I'm the one who's being asked the question, so I'm going to say 4.
Do you know what? In reflection of looking back at the issue, I'm not giving it as much credit as I did before. Probably because I read the first issue a couple of times. I had the excitement level attached to it. I had the kind of interest was there as well. With the second issue, I didn't read it until I came back to the UK. Until I came back to the US. after being in the UK on over the holiday break. And I was not in a rush, but because I had issue 2 and issue 3 at hand, I was like, right, I'll get through these. I probably didn't give it as much credit as I thought on reflection. The one thing that stands out for me as being something that's even better about this issue than the first one is just that leader 1 Psykill fight and that whole how that plays out, and like you mentioned, that kind of very cinematic feeling of the Renegades and the Guardians kind of, fighting. I was like, oh, this is amazing. And you're right, it almost feels like, well, we're at the end already, but we've still got some issues to go.
Only thought I can really put in there is that he's not really established those Guardians. I mean, we've had characters like Hans Cuff as, well, 2 police cars. We've had Rescue, who actually kind of ended up looking like a renegade because he's got the deal in the ambulance where all the different sort of bone saws and needles are coming out. Yeah. So that's a bit more ambiguous. But he's bringing those Guardians together, and it's kind of like, well, where did he get them? He's just got them beaten up in the desert, and now he's going to sort of rally the troops. So a little bit of a flaw with it, but again, it's part of that accelerated storytelling.
Yeah, and because of that, I'm gonna give it a 3.5. But I do love that scene, like, a lot more than I'd say the first issue for me was a lot more consistent. It's hard to say. It's hard to really have any idea of what you think of a Tom Scioli comic. They're so, are you taking your perspective and putting it in as a, like when you were a kid, and would this have been something that interested you? And it probably would have been something like if this comic as it is came out as I was a kid, it would have been, I think, it would have been one of those things where you're like, oh my god, they just ripped his face off, and like there'd be elements of that shock value, I think, in there.
He's not the guy that I'd let run the main Transformers book, but he's a special projects guy. You give him something like this and he's going to put his own sort of touches onto it. As far as would we have liked this in the 80s, I would have preferred this to the Transformers G.I. Joe crossover with Hawk and Goldbug and the like, because it's just more exciting.
Yeah, and it's more linear. It's more like the world is more contained. Like I feel like the walls just fall down on the G.I. Joe Transformers crossover because it is so out there and different and crazy, and I do like a little bit of structure in my comics sometimes. And that thing you mentioned about Tom, special projects guy, he's perfect for all of these different little brands that maybe don't have any love or are just kind of floating around, having not done anything for 30 years. I think he's perfect for kind of jumping on like some of these brands and having that, because he's got like he's certainly got the audience for that now.
Just for clarification, I meant the original Transformers G.I. Joe crossover from the 80s. I know that he did his take on it as well, but I prefer this Gobots to that original Transformers G.I. Joe crossover as well. I felt it was just a little bit boring.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was they played it very safe, I think, but it wasn't. Yeah, it certainly wasn't. There's so much more they could have done with that. But anyway, moving on to issue 3. Welcome to Gobotron. Leader 1 and the Gobots have built a planet of their own. Astronauts Lee Spencer, Charlotte Scott, and Veniamin Alexander pay Gobotron a visit and find themselves victims of the strange and deadly politics of the Gobotrocracy. A Gobotocracy. That's really hard to say. If they can escape Zod, the Gobot monster, they'll have to face the judgment of the Rock Lords. Is there a place for people in a post-human society? Now, this was interesting for me. I must admit, I was not expecting it to go this direction, but it did.
No, this is where things get weird.
It's weird, but at the same time, it still isn't doing the Transformers G.I. Joe crossover weird. It's just weird because it's out of place when you start reading it, isn't it? And then it makes a bit more sense when you get to the end.
It's a massive flash forward.
Massive.
Before we talk about the main issue, I must talk about Spacey on the cover, on the main cover. It looks brilliant. Like he's farting.
It does. Loads of that little guff just under his right, in that little gap with his right arm and his waist. Yeah. Spacey, you little guffer.
In space, no one can smell your fart.
That's different. That's actually different for me. Mine are so bad you can smell them even in a vacuum of space.
That's
okay. So
it's more a brown hole than a black hole.
And funnily enough, the panel starts off looking from the inside of a colon by the looks of things, a Gobot colon.
Yeah.
So okay, so we've got this. We've got Spacey, and he's containing all of these astronauts, and they're on a mission, and it's a deep space mission because they're in stasis and they just come out of stasis. It's very Aliens. I do like like standing around the table in their underwear kind of Aliens thing, like when the Space Marines get out of stasis and Aliens. I love that. And they basically are brought out of stasis because they're near Gobotron. I mean, take us through, Dave. What we see from that point on.
Yeah, they touch down. They come out of stasis. They've got a mission to do. Within 2 panels, they're already being menaced by Pincher and Scorp and some of the monster renegades. So Spacey needs to change his modes into robot mode. And Spacey is normally a female in the original animated series, but here it's a male. Rescues the humans, and as he says, the little buggy that's carrying the four humans goes flying, and he catches it, and he says, one of them remarks, we almost fell off the edge of the world, which is a big pullback to at the bottom of the page. We see it's Gobotron. It's that apple core shape of Gobotron that we're familiar with. And the monster renegades still sort of carry on trying to attack Spacey, but very quickly Zod, the big dinosaur renegade, comes after them. And this is where it's going to sort of change to, sort of the main crux of the next few issues, because there's something that's brought up later in the issue, the laser lance. And that, of course, is the toy that came with the Zod toy that you would poke in the stomach to deactivate him. And we see here that Leader One has already set up this Gobotocracy.
Oh, that's better. That's better.
There you go. I had to show that off. He's already set that up, and he's kind of this warrior king, quite violent, as we already established, because he's embittered over what had already happened in the past, which how long ago in the past we don't know, but obviously some time, because of so much having gone on.
I did find this quite confusing initially, because one, I wasn't aware we were looking so far in the future. I wasn't even aware we were looking in the future, really. I did read through it quite quickly as well, so I wasn't really taking a lot of it on board, especially at the beginning, and I had to go back and read it again, and I'm like, ah. And when the reveal happened, it had more impact on me, because I was like, what? It was like I wasn't expecting that. And we'll get to the reveal in a little while, but it was the fact that I suppose the way that Leader One was acting throughout this issue, that is one of the clues as to how far in the future it is, because obviously he's gone from a very good moral Gobot who is like looking to protect humans and so on and so forth, and now he's like this weird dictator who has almost like a twisted view on the world, and he's very, I don't know, still very, very much more violent than he used to be, and very little compassion. And it's not until, you kind of get through this issue that you start realizing, oh, I see, that's why that's happened. Because over time, and there's been a lot of it, you can see where, I don't know, power corrupts and all that kind of, all those different elements start coming together.
We've not talked about every single detail of what happened in the comics, and the reason is, go out and read them. The comics are out, the reveals have been revealed at this point, but go out and read them because they are good comics. And the reason why he's become so embittered is because Nick died in the end of the last issue,
exactly,
and that's affected him. It's quite interesting as you go on. The way he is not something that can stay as it will be, or stay as it is. And they even sort of hint at Road Ranger of all characters as almost like an Optimus Prime character.
Yeah,
we sort of see him. There is a Road Ranger riding the wild highways of Gobotron. They say he's descended from kings. I can only imagine that they've kind of established him as a potential high up character because it's a truck. It's Optimus Prime basically.
Yeah.
And I have no problem with that. Do something different with it. And he has a visitation from basically his repaint in the second series of the toys, blue and white repaint as Eno, which obviously is one backwards, and he kind of gives him an awakening to change him a little bit. And that's where the aforementioned laser lance, which is the thing that will defeat Zod for them, is sort of revealed to him. And Spacey is becoming part of the Gobots. The humans have that kind of precarious relationship with Spacey now because he's changing. And you could have this sort of battle between the Guardians at this point, but no, Cycle's still around. He's about to throw Dumper of all characters off the edge of a cliff, and then half of Dumper gets bitten off well, more than half, because all that remains is his arms, by Zod. So we know that Zod's going to be the main monster that they'll use. We've got the command center, we've got the thruster in there. All the toys in the toy box are being used for this story, and they're being used like toys as well. I just like the little touches that are in place. I mean, he's kind of establishing the GoBots as almost like human characters with human flaws, but then you get to the panel where it's night, the GoBots sleep, and you'd almost kind of imagine them to be sort of wrapped up in bed, but instead they're just on these kind of panels as if recharging.
Yeah.
Quite sort of jarring, and it just re-establishes they are robots.
Yeah. Something I found really cute about this issue was like you're talking about using the toy box and using them as toys, is that the command center is almost treated like a big dog. And and also when there's one panel where they go past it's almost like a field like of them. Bird. I know, yeah. They're all just kind of like pretending to eat the ground and sitting up and like all this kind of, and you kind of like it's cute because I mean I've done that with my AT-AT in the past. I've and I know there's been a few really good cute kind of like that AT-AT Dog Day Afternoon or AT-AT Day Afternoon fan video where it's like a stop motion of this little AT-AT toy like being a dog, and it's so adorable.
There's a part where the command center sits down for leader one as well.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's just
heel.
It's so cute, and I initially looked at it and thought, oh come on, but then I did just think, oh it's cute and it's funny, and I quite like it, and the fact that it's like sit and he sits and then becomes the actual center, like the with all the deprogramming and all of the jail and all that kind of stuff, like on show. So you actually see it actually transform into its its alternate use, I suppose, its alternate format.
And see the layout of it as well, which looks like something that you see in like a toy catalogue.
Oh yeah, it's like you look at it and you think the temptation would be to kind of go big and like how at the and say like in a G.I. Joe comic, like a Larry Hama comic, he makes the pit this huge amazing thing, when in actual fact the toy would look more like the mobile command center.
Absolutely.
And this but he has just gone, what, it's going to look exactly the same as the toy. And it's just, and I just quite like that the open plan aspect of the front is just brilliant.
Yeah, it is open plan. I mean, they've got like a cafeteria and detention centre and disassembler, but they are on show. It's not like there's like walls around them.
Exactly.
It is open, and to the point where they have to close it up, and Twin Spin gets trapped in it, and half of him is left inside it, and the rest of him is pulled out by Cycle in one go.
Great. It's so I do like that, and this whole. This issue as well, it's another one that I did rinse through, but now again on reflection I'm kind of enjoying it, I think, a bit better on the second reading. Now Spacey kind of gets almost like I suppose like imprisoned by the Gobots, even though he's not an evil guy, but the Gobots have been they're a little bit more the Guardians I should say are kind of a little bit more twisted now he's imprisoned and he's going to get deprogrammed, but they escape. Spacey escapes and the astronauts too, but the astronauts have got to the point where they are not trusting Spacey because he isn't kind of being fully open with them, because he's almost trying to get the trust of the Guardians, and he can't let them know that the humans exist as such. So there's this kind of weird dynamic. It's almost like a broken dynamic between the Guardian, Spacey, and the humans in this, which I thought was quite an interesting contrast, an interesting interaction between the three of those different species, as it were.
Yeah, I think if there's a weak point to this issue, it's the humans, because who are they? There's 4 of them. The solicitation says that there's 3. We can guess that the one that's female is Charlotte Scott. Who's the other ones? They're not established. So while we should be feeling danger on their behalf, I'm not, because I'm not aligned with them. I know the Guardians better than I know the astronauts.
Yeah.
So why should I sort of feel imperiled on their behalf?
Yeah, that's a good point, because we don't know who is who, and it's not made very clear. Mainly because as well, you see them in their spacesuits a lot, and they all look exactly the same. And with the moments you don't see them in the spacesuits, the 3 male characters are very hard to distinguish. Obviously, there's the black character, so at least there's a distinguishing feature there. But with the 2 white characters, it's just hair color, and you don't see it very clearly each time, and
No.
it's black hair and it's brown hair. So it's like, and even then, I don't know who to attach the names to in the first place anyway. So you're right.
No.
There's a definite disconnect there.
You need a little caption to say Lee Spencer, Benjamin Alexander.
Another thing I found quite interesting about it was he's keying in the color code on the door.
Yeah, it's like Simon Says.
And it's the Simon Says blooming, and I love that. It's like the red, blue, green, and yellow kind of pieces. I thought that was a lovely little 80s nod as well.
It's almost like a bit of a comedy moment as well, because it's like, let's remember the sequence.
Exactly.
Blue, red, yellow, green. That's not exactly difficult to remember, but they do the bit where they all kind of ladder up and go, remember the sequence. Oh, I can't reach the top button.
Stretch everybody, and they made it just in time, and then it opens the door, and then Spacey catches them before they fall to their death, which again is cute.
As the issue progresses, though, again, speed. A lot is happening. We've got a big space-based battle between the Renegades and the Guardians, but going out to space for that battle, but then coming back to Gobotron for the climax of the issue, is that we're getting to that inner world of Gobotron, and that's a very interesting part in and of itself, and that's something I think we're going to see certainly over the next issue, and maybe expanding out into the finale as well. So,
well, it's good because one, it reveals the Rock Lords, which is a quick cameo, and it's almost like a just keep going, don't stop kind of scenario as they're like on their way to the reveal. Like they don't know they're on the way to the reveal, but we do as a readership. And as they kind of eventually get away from the battle between the Guardians and the... it turns into Guardians versus Spacey as he protects them from Turbo and Scooter, who looks like the blimmin'... He looks like Macaulay Culkin when he puts aftershave on his face. But so they're basically on...
In the review of the previous issue, he's talking in that... Turbo, first line of the issue, "Don't move, Gobots scum," kind of positions him differently because we obviously haven't seen him aligned with Leader One, but Scooter is sounding half. Scooter, like new friend.
Yeah, he's like Wheelie in a way, isn't he? He's got that almost like they're kind of, There's a lot. I mean, obviously we've seen the Optimus Prime homage, we've seen the Bumblebee homage, and now we're seeing like a Wheelie homage, which is quite funny. Yeah,
and the reality is that the Wheelie voice without the effects on it is the Scooter voice.
Yeah.
The commercial for the toys out where the movie toys, Transformers the movie toys, where you hear him say the same line from the movie but without the effects on, and it is just basically the Scooter voice.
Wheelie sing, find friends today!
So we're kind of moving the plot on. We've moved away a little bit from Leader One, and we've got this battle between Turbo and Spacey. So kind of Spacey showing that he is he is going to look after these astronauts that we've established a relationship with. You mentioned about the Rock Lords, which is great to see the Rock Lords in place. I don't know that the astronauts actually notice them.
Probably not.
It's kind of odd how it's kind of position on the page, because you see Stonehead, which is would have been the big base toy for the Rock Lords, and you see Solitaire and Boulder and Nugget atop them, who are probably the best known Rock Lords, mainly because they're, other than Magmar, they're the only ones who got the celebrity voice actors.
Yeah.
They're kind of watching over the top of it, and then we find out, this inner planet inside Gobotron is Earth, but it's kind of an apocalyptic post-battle Earth. So we'll find out more about that. But how did the Rock Lords come to exist on that planet as well, or our planet as it is? So more for us to find out in issue 4.
What I really thought was quite funny about this is he's got like a beach shovel and spade to like take the sample with.
Yeah.
And then he basically dips his finger in it and then tells them it's Earth. So it's not even like he's done any tests or anything.
No.
It's just that he's come to that conclusion himself.
Bucket and spade. He doesn't even like scoop a sample up with his bucket and spade. He just kind of gets it on his thumb and forefinger and goes, "Guys, this is Earth."
It's amazing. And so I think that's really funny and cute. But it's a nice reveal, and I love the face through his space suit as well. How like it's like, oh shit. And like the realization that everyone he knows and loves is gone. But even though they already know that in a sense, because they've been told that it's they've been kept in stasis for like a really, really long time. But the reveal to find out they're actually on Earth is something that is just like, what the happened? So yeah, it's interesting way to go with it. And what are you expecting in the next issue, Dave? Have you read the synopsis for it?
I've read it. I haven't got it to mind other than we're going to get the Rock Lords. I've seen a little bit of Tom Scioli's work on like Instagram and Twitter, and I think he's going to have, a number of the Rock Lord characters. I think he's got the Gnarlies in there as well. So we'll get that. I think preemptive of you asking me what the rating will be for this issue, I can't say that it's at the same high level as the previous two issues, but it's only because this feels like it should be issue 6 of the 5-parter that runs from issue 6 to issue 10.
Yes.
With issue 1 and 2 being the bookends of a 5-part series themselves. So because of that, because there's so many sort of questions unanswered, and not that that's a bad thing, but just because there's so much confusion in place, he'll need to answer that in a timely fashion for us to know what has gone on. Has he tried to cram too much in for sake of, well, we might only get one GoBot series, so I'm going to throw everything into it. So I'm going to bring the rating down to probably a 3 out of 5 rather than a 4 out of 5 for this one. But there's no reason why, if he gets it all together for the next issue and then the finale, that rating couldn't raise back up.
It's for me, it's one of those things where it kind of kills a few not opportunities, but it does kill options for them, in that if they go from this point onwards, then you've minimized obviously the Earth aspect quite significantly. Sure. But what it does mean though is if they've gone so far into the future, then they've got a lot of stories to tell in between, the end of issue 2 and then all the way through to that. So I mean, it doesn't mean that universe is over for us story wise. Like, it's always going to be there. But I've always found that with like jumping into the future to tell stories in any brand, I always feel like, I've missed out on something, or are we ever going to see that again? Do you know what I mean? They're the two things that float around my head. Like, and it's I suppose human nature to think, okay, we're already at the future now, so all of that stuff we can just completely disregard because we know it's almost spoiled, because we know who's here, who's involved, and we know who isn't involved, which, more often than not is the more important spoiler there.
And I'm thinking to myself, I really hope that we get more GoBots. I hope we get a second GoBots I don't want a second GoBots mini-series. I'd be happy with a GoBots regular series, an ongoing series. But I hope that we don't get or wouldn't get a lesser quality series at the expense of him having thrown all his ideas into this.
Agreed.
Ultimately, the number of people that are buying the comics and are reading them and enjoying them, if there's a big drop off after issue 1, then we're less likely to see more issues. So maybe it's a good thing that we're getting so much in such a cramped space. But if it's the opposite and we're going to get more, but he's really going to have to stretch for good ideas, then it might have been an unworthy sacrifice.
I'm gonna mirror you, but in what you were saying. But my score goes to 3.5 because I did actually enjoy this one, and I am a sucker. I'm a massive sucker for big reveals, and that one at the end I thought was like, oh, cool. Even though it does, like, as I said, it does kind of hinder some opportunity in what you're doing, in the scope of what you're doing. I do like it when there's like connections and reveals and big things like that kind of make it a little bit interesting and maybe take the story down a route that you wouldn't expect. And sometimes it takes me a while to kind of come over to those ideas. You could read a comic in the first week or so and just be like, nah, this is crap. And then a year or so's time, you go back to it and you go, actually, no, I really like this. This is a good idea. This is cool. I don't know why I dismissed this like so quickly back in the day. And with this kind of comic, I think that's easy to do when you're so used to a certain style and technique. And, everything IDW have done that isn't Tom Scioli is always very careful, down the middle, kind of, trying to get as many of the original fans on board as well as pick up some new readers. So they don't really go to massive extremes to change a lot of of those things. So it's nice to have something that is so crazy, and obviously with hardly any significant brand exposure for 20 odd 30 years possibly.
30 plus, yeah.
So I mean, I'm happy for him to take it in a crazy direction, but again, there is that worry that he's throwing a lot of stuff at the dartboard to see what sticks, I suppose.
And you made your point as well about whether it'll hold up. Now, I tried to revisit his Transformers G.I. Joe crossover prior to reading Gobots to see whether I could get a new appreciation of it, and unfortunately I couldn't. But with this, we've got 2 more issues to go that will come out in February and March 2019, and then later in the year we'll get the trade paperback. And I'm not just looking forward to the 2 upcoming issues, but I'm also looking forward to the trade paperback as well, because of all the, hopefully, the different sort of back matter and bonus features that it'll put in as well to expand it even further. So I'm liking this. I want more. I don't know if we'll get more, but if we did get more than what we've got a pretty good little mini series anyway.
Awesome. Dave, thank you so much, mate, for jumping on and doing the first part of this Gobots special. We'll be reconvening in March, hopefully, for the other 2 issues. So again, thank you for jumping on, mate. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Absolutely.
That's it for this special instalment of the Full Force Comics Burst. Thank you to my awesome co-host Dave Newman. See you next time, and as always, full Gobot Force. Make sure you get involved with the discussion by liking, sharing and commenting on these videos, and as always, you can keep up with the show after listening by following on Twitter @TheFullForce, liking the Facebook page facebook.com/TheFullForce, and if you would like to contact the show, you can message us on either of those platforms with feedback, questions or just a troll. Look out for more of these comic bursts on Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, our Facebook page, Twitter feed and YouTube channel from now on. Full Force. And a big shout out to our sponsors, Distant Planet Comics and Collectibles, located at 601 Business Loop 70 West Suite 263, located in the Parkade Center, Columbia, Missouri. You can visit their website at distantplanetcomics.com and on Facebook at facebook.com/Distant Planet Comics.